At one point in time, police did not have any standardized roadside testing to use when investigating DUI drivers. Officers just asked drivers to sometimes stand on one leg, maybe recite phrases, or even touch their nose to judge things like balance, speech, and coordination. Some early cops even had suspects say tongue twisters like Methodist Episcopal 3 times over. I can barely say it once. But each officer used different methods. In other words, there was no national standard. One patrol in 1960 might, for example, check bloodshot eyes. Another might play word games, but practices varied widely, and no one really knew what the heck these results even meant. Well, this changed when the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, otherwise known as NHTSA, sought some consistency. In 1975, researchers Marcelin Burns and Herbert Moskowitz, they tested over 100 possible exercises to find perhaps reliable signs of alcohol intoxication. Well, after some trials and some research, none of which was peer-reviewed, NHTSA identified 3 maneuvers as best at distinguishing drunk from sober drivers. The horizontal gaze nystagmus, otherwise known as the HGN. So in this test, officers move an object called a stimulus in front of the driver's eyes. They're looking for up to 6 clues, 3 clues in each eye. The walk and turn test. The driver in this test takes 9 heel-to-toe steps in a straight line, turns in a prescribed manner, and then walks 9 heel-to-toe steps back. The officer in this test is looking for up to 8 clues. The one-leg stand. The driver in this test holds one foot about 6 inches off of the ground and counts to 30 while standing. There's a maximum of 4 clues to be observed in this test. By comparing the results with breathalyzer readings, NHTSA found that each test alone was moderately accurate. For example, the horizontal gaze nystagmus test was, according to NHTSA, correct about 77% of the time. But using all 3 together gave higher confidence, again, according to NHTSA. Then in 1981, NHTSA distributed training materials nationwide, officially standardizing this SFST, or Standardized Field Sobriety Test Battery, across police departments around the country. So today's field sobriety testing battery consists of these 3 tests as mentioned, administered or should be administered exactly as NHTSA prescribes. Officers follow a detailed manual giving precise instructions and counting specific clues for each test. Now, over the years, NHTSA has updated these manuals to clarify some details. For example, the 2006, 2013, and 2015 editions add guidance on lighting, weather, and what to do if a suspect won't or can't perform a test. However, some of these changes have not been validated, and some of these changes move away from the original intent of these field sobriety testing. Now, as to these changes, they were never really explained by NHTSA, and additionally, there was no other research that was cited that would validate these changes. Now, speaking of that, NHTSA has also been criticized because of these field sobriety tests and the changes made over time. Some of this criticism has been focused on the fact that the original raw data, for example, was never examined outside of the government itself. It was never, ever peer-reviewed. And that's a problem. Importantly, the NHTSA standard tests were validated for alcohol impairment only. NHTSA itself notes that the horizontal gaze nystagmus test signals central nervous system depressants, like alcohol, and cannot reliably detect marijuana or stimulant use. And research actually bears this out. A 2021 National Institute of Justice report found that heavy cannabis smokers did just as well on the HGN test, the walk and turn test, and the one-leg stand test when high as compared to when sober. In other words, failing or passing these tests usually correlates with blood alcohol, but often misses, cannabis impairment. So when it does come to handling drug driving, many states actually rely on specifically trained drug recognition experts, otherwise known as DREs. A DRE undergoes extensive training, many weeks of training actually, to perform a 12-step evaluation, which includes examining pupil size, vital signs, divided attention tasks, and so forth. Now, some jurisdictions also use blood tests for drugs after a traffic stop, which is the case actually in my state, Washington State. But crucially, there is no quick roadside marijuana field sobriety test at the present time. Field sobriety testing has come a long way since the 1960s. Back then, each officer kind of made it up. They made up their own tests at traffic stops, and there was no consistency or rhyme or reason. But thanks to NHTSA's research in the late 1970s, every police officer in the U.S. now uses the same 3 validated tests. However, it's critical to understand their limitations as well as the original purpose for these tests. These tests were never designed to detect and confirm alcohol impairment or cannabis impairment at all. They were developed as roadside tests to confirm the suspicion of impairment by alcohol. Further, even though they are used to assist with the detecting of cannabis and other drug impairment, they are not designed for these purposes, and the research is not consistent with their use. All of this being said, the field sobriety test battery does have a useful place when investigating drunk drivers at roadside. And if you've been arrested or charged with DUI in either Skagit or Whatcom County, please give my law firm a call. The only thing we do in our practice is represent those accused of DUI.